Stephen King, your favorite novelist and master of modern horror, has written his first motion picture screenplay. It combines all the elements of his creative imagination. Lovable pets, classic cars, quiet evenings, favorite films.
Kill the son of a...
Good idea.
Adorable kids.
Help me! It's after me!
And of course, a monster or two. Experience a series of electrifying adventures as seen through Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
What's up, Rotters, and welcome back to the podcast that takes a deep dive into the best and worst horror films of the 80s and 90s. I'm Stevie, your VHS veteran. How are we all doing? Horrendously, I hope. Have you got that October tingle? I mean, we just had an October Friday the 13th, and I nearly fainted with maniacal excitement. A few things to get through today before we delve into our chat about Cat's Eye. Firstly, a giveaway. Yes, I have been sent a copy of the truly fucking stunning 4K UHD steelbook of the 50th anniversary edition of The Wicker Man. It is truly a beautiful steelbook. Any collectors out there, you need this in your set, and it is exclusive to Best Buy in America, and Studio Canal kindly sent me a copy to give away to one lucky UK listener. Just to confirm, you'll need a 4K UHD player or games console that is UHD friendly in order to play it in the UK. The main disc with the restoration and all the extras is region free, and the standard Blu-ray is region A locked. But if you're getting it, why would you want the standard? But yes, I am giving it to you. I'll be dropping the entry details on the platform formerly known as Twitter. I think it's called X or something now, later today. So make sure you're following us on there. The handle is Stevie's Brain Rot. Very excited about that, and kind of want to just keep it for myself, but I've told you about it now, so nope. Also, over on Patreon this month, we have got a feast for you. Still to come this month, the Mates of Hell, Brad Hansen and Alex Ayling will be stopping by to talk about Fulci's 1988 offering, Enigma. Zoran Gavojic will be here to discuss Phantasm 2, continuing our retrospective. Matt Draper swings by for our second Future Frights episode of the month, and also exclusive to the Cellar Dweller tier, the Dream Warriors, Mike Munzer and Becky Dark, will be continuing today's anthology tradition, and we will be discussing Dead Time Stories, which is currently streaming on Prime. And on the 21st of October, I'll be hosting a live watch-along with patrons, and the movie will be chosen by poll very soon. Come and join us. We bite. Just head to patreon.com/Stevie's Brain Rot, and let's have a fantastic month. Right then, as I alluded to earlier, today we're going to be discussing the banging 1985 Stephen King anthology movie Cat's Eye, directed by Lewis Teague. Joining me to discuss this triple whammy is the brilliant Michael Varrati, writer, director, host of the Midnight Mass podcast alongside the legendary Peaches Christ, and most importantly, my friend. We've previously had a blast discussing New Year's Evil, The Lair of the White Worm, and over on Patreon, Pumpkinhead, and today it is an honour to have him back. Michael Varrati, welcome back.
I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my goodness. Honestly, when I was setting up this sort of Zoom meeting, I got so excited because A, I get to talk to you. Two, do you see where this is going? Yeah. So, A, I get to talk to you. Two, it is spooky season I get to talk to you in. Trois,
We're just running the gamut of bullet points.
Yeah. We get to talk about an anthology, and Blue, we get to talk about a King anthology.
Yes. No, I think that you and I also have a pretty good run of talking around holidays, because I think that we spoke for spooky season almost 2 years ago about Pumpkinhead, and then we did our Patreon for your Patreon conversation about New Year's Evil. So we're kind of like holiday heroes.
It's our thing.
For someone.
It's one of we are. For at least each other.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, no, it is that, and I always think of you around this time. Maybe because of that, that's how we've connected, and it's like we're almost dormant the rest of the year, and then I come alive, and that's certainly how I live the year. But how have you been? Obviously, a lot has happened since we last chatted on here. I know I've chatted to you personally, but there's been strikes, there's been chainsaw awards, there's been all sorts.
Yeah, it has been a year of ups and downs and tumultuous goings on. It is true that earlier in the year I did write and direct the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards, the 2023 Chainsaw Awards that aired on Shudder, I believe internationally as well, which was a really great and daunting experience. You know, usually award shows have a team of writers, but I wrote it on my own. So it was kind of like many late nights hoping that I just kept it entertaining enough, and then I directed it as well, and it was a 2-day shoot that resulted in a feature-length television special that allowed me to work with so many amazing folks from the horror sphere, icons and colleagues and legends, and I'm still sort of overwhelmed by it and grateful for the experience. And then just as the chainsaws were hitting television, the Writers Guild went on strike and subsequently were followed by SAG-AFTRA, putting so many projects on pause and putting the industry on pause. And obviously I was in solidarity with my fellow writers and actors. But it was a long summer because all of us were waiting to see what the future of our work looked like. And now the writers' strike is done. It sounds like the actors are are getting close. I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but I know negotiations are ongoing, and in my mind, that's optimistic. And I think that we're about to head into a new chapter of entertainment, and hopefully it's just good and kind for everybody.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm in complete solidarity with that, and the unions over there in the entertainment industry, no shade, but they are definitely a lot more of literally a union of everyone together, whereas here I think a lot of the time it just feels like, oh, that's that membership I've got to pay once a month, and it's just a bit annoying. And so actually it's inspiring to see, and I kind of hope at some point we may take note and, you know, sort some shit out that needs to be sorted out and stop getting treated like idiots some of the time. But for now, we'll see how it all plays out. But I'm very glad it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that you, speaking on the idea that you hope it sparks further conversation there, I think that really what has happened here is that it was not just a singular standing point for one union. I think it has really sparked conversation amongst many labor movements, and a lot of industries, both in entertainment and out, are looking at their structure and saying, hey, maybe people are not being treated well. I know that UPS here went on strike this summer. We've seen a lot of the hotels go on strike. And I believe there was an automotive strike pending, if I am correct. If someone out there will correct me, because that's what the internet does. But basically what we're saying and seeing is that labor is fighting back, and justly so.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think, you know, it definitely has been felt here because there has been such a knock-on effect, because especially nowadays with streaming, nearly every one of our big programs is either optioned by Netflix or, you know, slightly... there's a producer from Prime or anything like that. So a lot of ours did sort of come to a halt, and then we had some people who are members of SAG in terms of the actors' strike, SAG-AFTRA strike, you know, stopping their West End shows because they have to say, and so you know, it does feel like we're sort of being embraced and brought into it, which feels really good.
Well, and it makes sense because we no longer live in a multimedia world where borders are where media stops. Streaming is international. There are conglomerates. Like when you make a movie regionally, it can be seen by everyone in the world instead of your small pocket. I mean, for example, for listeners in the United Kingdom, I'm here in Los Angeles, and one of the closest network offices to where I live is ITV. They have an outlet here in Los Angeles, and it's sort of like, okay, I know that's a very British network, but they're in my backyard, so...
No way. I had no idea. That's really interesting. But as I said, it is the season. It is our season, and there is nothing to me that really ignites and kicks off the season like an anthology movie of any quality, I have to say. Even something where you're kind of... We were sort of talking a little bit just before we start recording about how more of the modern anthologies, you're kind of waiting for the one or the good one or the segment. But it feels like in the 80s, whether then... I would never say that they're all good, but you never get bored, and every time it seems to feel like, oh, this is original and it's different.
Yeah. I don't know. I love the idea that anthologies have a connection to the spooky season for you, because I get that, because it makes me think of sort of the tradition of getting together around a campfire and telling stories.
Exactly.
Or the idea of hanging out on Halloween night over your bag of candy and be like, I heard the story about the haunted house up the street, or about the lady who ate her kids, or whatever, and then it just spins from there. People want to be scared, and they also want to have bite-sized scares, and that's what anthologies are. You get the king-size candy bar the rest of the year. These are the bite-size that you get in your trick-or-treat bag, and that's a lot of fun. And I did say king-sized on purpose, because obviously...
I was going to say... I was wondering, I thought... But then I know you so well, I was like, no, he can't have done that by mistake. Of course not. It's Michael Varrati.
Well, I mean, and you said it at the top of the show. Stephen King is responsible for so many... things that we love about the Halloween season and horror in general, but has been a contributing factor to so many anthologies: Creepshow, Tales from the Dark Side, and of course the one we're here to talk about today. And I think that he certainly, during this era of cinema, the 80s, was firing on all cylinders, because we were getting the feature films, but also these bite-sized stories that in some ways are still as pop culturally relevant as ever.
Yeah, and what I think is great is it's not like they took some of his books and then thought, oh, let's shorten them and put them together, because he wrote anthologies that, if we call them that, it's the same thing, isn't it? Because he released these books of anthologies, and maybe that's where the connection comes in, because I certainly, as a young kid, would love to pick up one of my King anthologies around the spooky season. Once I graduated from Goosebumps, Point Horror, then King, and so it was it was very seasonal for me.
One thing that Stephen King has been praised for over the majority of his career, even when the kind of ivory tower elite of literature would look down their nose at him, was the fact that he was so prolific at short stories and so accomplished at short stories. I know that many critics who didn't like his novels have always liked his short form stories. And I think that that's really interesting, because when you think of King novels, I'm in a book club, and it is a King-centric book club where we sometimes tackle his books, and it takes a couple months. Like, we just read Fairy Tale, and we needed a couple months because it's close to 1,000 pages. Wonderful experience, but that's kind of the norm for his books. It is over 1,000 pages. The Stand is like 1,500 pages. The Dark Tower is 8 books long. And so it's that thing where to look at an author who has such a expansive brain and a penchant for world building, who then can turn around and tell a 5-page story that scares you with just the same amount of ferocity, it really does speak to his talent as a storyteller and a writer. And what I always liked about his short stories, especially kind of during the era that we're talking about, when he not only was...
Night Shift.
Night Shift, different seasons, 4 Past Midnight, these things where he would not only publish the anthologies of short stories, the short story collections, but then his short stories would get published in magazines, something that doesn't really happen all that often anymore. And so he built sort of a cottage industry as being America's favorite short story writer for a bit, or at least most accessible. And so it makes sense that when you have movies like Carrie and The Shining and, Salem's Lot coming out of the 70s into the 80s, people are going to start looking at all of his material. And I think that his anthologies pack as much of a punch as some of the features do.
Oh, completely. And it feels to me like the reason he made them short stories is because he knew that's, one, all they needed, and two, can't be fleshed out. I mean, we've seen it with Children of the Corn.
Yeah.
I mean, if that short story alone, before I did this long journey, went through them all, I reread it, and it's fucking perfection. And it gets chills up the back of your spine. It's simple, it's effective, and there's a reason he made it 27 pages or whatever it is.
Exactly.
There's an absolute reason. Otherwise, he would have expanded that idea and brought it into a novel, but he thought, no, it belongs as a very short story. And I don't... we've seen several times people try to stretch out the Stephen Kings. I believe Sometimes They Come Back was considered to be one of the sections in Cat's Eye, but then De Laurentiis, I think the producer, was like, no, I think that deserves to be a full film, and it turned into 5 or 6 films, you know, and there's a reason.
It's true.
Why he does that.
And look, I'm going to be that person to say on the record that I am a Children of the Corn enthusiast apologist, maybe.
Okay.
But I do think that you are correct. There is something from a storytelling standpoint and a creative standpoint that a story really is only going to be as long as it needs to be. You know, like a story tells you what it needs. And he knew, telling that original story, that it just needed that brief drop in. You're dropped into a town that's ruled by children. You don't need to know anything else. Terrifying.
Right.
And I think that there is a world where, studios are gonna studio. They want to make money. They want to look at ways. And it works sometimes. You know, Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption is a novella, but they turned it into one of the most epic motion pictures
Correct.
ever. So I think that, you know, it's all about the execution, but it's also all about the awareness of format and how you're telling the story. I think some people can take a short story, put it into a new format and make it work, and other people are just like, let's churn content for cash, you know?
You're absolutely right with that, because there definitely are exceptions, like you say, and they're often the less horror ones, because The Body, of course, for instance, which became Stand By Me as well, is a very good example of fleshing out a short story.
I think Stephen King is a brilliant horror writer, and of course that's why so many of us know him, because we're all horror nerds. But what really, really makes me appreciate him as a writer is his ability to craft characters and craft scenario. And it's never bothered me when he strays outside of horror. And in fact, those are some of my favorite King stories, because he can tell a story with such emotional impact just based on humanity. I've always said that he's a master not just of horror, but of Americana. That's one of the things we like about him.
That's exactly right.
He kind of tells stories about small town America, where whether you are inclined to be interested in a story about a ancient clown demon, sure, but like, you know, the women who are at the supermarket in Derry who are gossiping. You know, the bully kid who is mean to you. And that's a universal experience. Yeah, it skews like Midwest or Pacific. No, Atlantic Northwest, Maine, New England.
Yeah, of course.
But he has taken this Americana experience and made it accessible for all people, because in some ways we all know the kind of people he writes about.
Totally. I mean, there's nothing like Stephen King bullies. You know, they immediately who they are. But then with Cat's Eye, so 1985, Lewis Teague. Yeah. He had a good run. So I'm shouting out alligator here and saying, that is one of my favorites.
I mean, he has a run of animal-themed films, right? We've got Alligator and Cujo and Cat's Eye.
Yes, of course.
The Zoo of Lewis Teague.
He was the animal guy. Yeah. And then Carlo Rambaldini, I think, was doing effects. I don't know if he designed the troll. I couldn't find out, so I didn't want to say, because I needed to know who designed the troll, but I'm assuming it was Rambaldini. And so what's your history with this one?
Cat's Eye is one of those movies that when I was a kid, or maybe like early teens, my parents had recently gotten an expanded cable package. And this was on one of those movie networks that had only a few movies to their name. Mm-hmm. And they used to run Cat's Eye a lot. And so it was one of those on, weekend afternoons or sometimes after school. If I was flipping through the channels, I would just land on. And so it was a film that I caught in fits and starts for probably a year before I finally sat down and watched it from front to back in full. But I had always seen like little bits of it. And then it was that thing where I realized, oh, this is all the same movie. Because I had like seen bits of The Ledge. I had seen James Woods trying to quit smoking. And of course, The Troll being so iconic. And then like putting those all together and realizing, oh, this is a really interesting trio of stories. And I've always liked it. I think that it is in many ways quintessentially Stephen King, while also being the antithesis of a lot of the movies that were adapted from his work at the time. When we did Creepshow over on Midnight Mass, there was the question of whether, like, if you could pick an anthology that wasn't Creepshow, what was your favorite film anthology? And this was my selection because I have such fond memories of it. And I think that on rewatch for this podcast, I stand by that. I think there's a lot of really great stuff here.
I think it's incredibly charming. And I came to it a bit later because if there was a VHS of it in the UK, which I'm sure it did, it definitely wasn't in my VHS store because I knew every cover in there and I never saw it. And so I came to it when it was released on DVD a lot later, and I felt like I was a bit upset. I remember I was like, I think this would have been one of my favorites had it been on that shelf when I was a kid, because it's got that wonderful tone where you go, is this for kids? Oh no, he just got liquidized and there's a lot of blood and guts. And then, oh no, it's about smoking, but some of it's very slapstick, and it's got that quintessential messed up demographic sort of, you're kind of wondering who is this for? And I loved it. And it was a PG-13, so it was very much available to younger people, but I love that it goes there with a lot of its content. And I mean, the first two, if I'm right in thinking, are both from Night Shift, and then the third one, General Pussy,
was written.
Sorry, listener, in case the listener hasn't heard, when I say General Pussy, it's the name of the cat. I'm not talking about an array of something else. Yeah.
Fair. Well, that story, the last story with General Pussy and the Troll, was written specifically for this, and was written specifically for Drew Barrymore because Stephen King had just worked with her on Firestarter.
Of course, that must have been this must have been quite soon after, like a year or a couple of years, I suppose. Well,
both movies were shot in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I'm wondering if they just kind of rolled production over, because I think a lot of the creative team was the same, or at least from a higher up production level.
Right. I mean, we'll talk about the sort of the wraparound and the through line that they try and thread, because sometimes when on the rewatch I was like, oh, hang on, you're not really answering why Drew Barrymore's appearing in a mannequin and why she's suddenly, not Shirley Valentine, what's her name? Shirley Temple on TV. But I think I read something about there originally was a prologue that explained more about the cat. I don't know if it was ever filmed.
That I don't know. I've read Louis Teague comment about the fact that he had a more expansive storyline explaining this sort of like psychic mystical connection between these sort of incarnations of Drew Barrymore and the cat, right, as well as the idea of if the cat was just a cat or something more, or what the cat's connection was. Because this version of the movie, it seems just sort of like a roving cat who's maybe supernatural or just maybe really lucky. I don't know.
Likes to travel, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that cat gets around.
Yeah. And I don't see it eat one meal, and the one time it does go for a meal, it gets trapped. But yeah, it goes from New York to New Jersey to North Carolina,
which is not as, I mean, New York to New Jersey I can buy. Those are adjacent.
Oh, he hops on the ferry anyway.
Yeah, but then the cat like rides the rails down to the Carolinas. That's
right.
That's no small trip.
I love it. So let's talk about the first one. So this is Quitters, Inc.
Yeah.
And we have James Woods. And of course we have, first of all, we can't start talking about this without talking about the abundance of Easter eggs, not only throughout it, but very much at the beginning. We get a nice few nods, don't we?
Yeah, we get Cujo chasing the cat, who at this point has no name. This cat goes through multiple names throughout the movie. So we get a Cujo cameo, and then the cat runs across the street and also causes Christine to slam on the brakes. So we get two very iconic looks at some Stephen King villains of yesteryear, while also introducing the cat as sort of like a scrappy element. I think that is really smart. Not only is it like a nice plug for the Stephen King of it all, but it's like we know that Cujo's vicious and we know that Christine's dangerous. So to see this cat kind of be like comically a foil to both of these things kind of tells you exactly what the cat is. And in many ways, it's sort of like setting the cat up as like the trickster element of the movie.
Yes, absolutely. Our trickster narrator. And I really do like that element. I love how it's sort of brought to a close at the end, and the cat becomes our hero in a way. So generally, what do you think about Quitters Inc., this one?
I think that Quitters Inc. is really interesting because I think from the offset, if you are just a casual Stephen King fan, this probably feels weird, right? It's not necessarily supernatural. It's not necessarily overtly grotesque. It's kind of almost a crime story. But I think that if you do a lot of deep reading of his stuff and the idea of the hidden society beneath society, this rings really true. Whenever I watch Quitters Inc., I always think of it as the Stephen King interpretation of an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, because it very much has that tone. A lot of like gentleman villains in business suits who are really polite and who have a specific aim. But if you step out of line, that's when the danger begins. And, so this is all James Woods wants to stop smoking, and he goes to this place that they're like, we're going to help you do that, but it's going to be really extreme. And the levels of which they take his commitment to stopping smoking, of course, are what the horror is. And I think that it's just really interesting because it's all about kind of corporate politeness, or really like social politeness with a lot of really, really ugly things underneath.
Right, yeah, everything that suggested these extreme measures. And I must say, I watched it I treated myself to the new 4K Studio Canal. And it's interesting, it starts with a disclaimer saying, please note that this film contains historical attitudes which modern audiences may find offensive. And I've never seen that before. So I was thinking, maybe they use some problematic words and things like that. And I was trying to find out what it is, and I didn't know if it was in one of these moments where he talks about, almost in a jovial way, that he'd have his wife sexually assaulted, and I don't know if that was it, or if maybe it's something to do with the suggestion that the school Drew Barrymore is at is for people with disability or extra needs. And so I was trying to find it all the way through, and maybe it says more about me that I wasn't offended by anything in this, but I thought that was really interesting.
I mean, it could also be the smoking of it all. I think that in the modern era, if literally smoking on screen increases your rating here. Like now, it's TVMA or TV14 for smoking. Whereas when we were growing up, people were just smoking left and right on TV in films, like you didn't think about it.
And in the living room.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I referenced this as being an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode as filtered by Stephen King. And there is a classic episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents where it's sort of like a bunch of classy men in a room and they start betting, which also will play into our next story, but they bet things with increasing kind of concern. And one of the things is they actually bet the fingers of their wife. And so then
I've seen that.
Yeah, and
I've seen that.
I believe that Peter Lorre is in the actual episode. And then Quentin Tarantino sort of did his homage to it in 4 Rooms, another anthology film. But it's interesting how the kind of button of that story is, the removal of a finger of a spouse. And that's also the button of a story here. And so it's sort of like, I think Stephen King, while being wildly original in horror, is also a student of horror. He wrote Dance Macabre. We know that he loves classic horror. We know that he loves classic thrillers. He loves old movies. And we see him take classic monsters and classic scenarios and reinterpret them in his lens all the time. Salem's Lot is Dracula. You know, the idea that some of his other stories are the Stephen King lens version of something else. I wouldn't be shocked if he grew up watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents and whether consciously or unconsciously borrowed this very grotesque thing. You know, you're going to quit smoking or we're going to keep your wife's finger, you know, like.
Right. It's great, and it does have that sort of almost a noir element to it, or this old New York gangster where, well, I grew up watching films where that's how New York was sold to me. It was dangerous, everybody's like this, you don't want to mess with anyone because they're all connected to someone, and it very much encapsulates that. And then I do think James Woods is so good in this, because I think he uses his face in such an incredible way. When he first gets there and he sits in the waiting room and he's like looking around trying to take this quitters club in, and everyone seems to be very distressed or, you know, very much in pain or upset and unconsolable. And he does so much yet so little with his face, and it's very funny. And that's another thing we should always point out with Stephen King, because I think people who don't know his work always just think, oh, it's horror, it's the scary clown one, it's that guy. And of course he is one of the funniest authors out there, and it's not gags, it's about observational, realistic human mishaps and observations, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that he uses humor really well, because it's so true to the human experience when you're experiencing something awful, to make a joke or to try and like make light to make yourself laugh so you feel better. And he's not a comedy writer. He doesn't like write a joke, he doesn't set it up, and he doesn't knock it down, but he imbues a lot of real world humor, and he makes fun of himself a lot. Especially in this movie, there are so many instances where he kind of takes the piss out of being Stephen King. James Woods is watching The Dead Zone on TV.
That's right.
And says, who writes this crap? Well, we know Stephen King does. And even funnier, of course, is that James Woods famously was in David Cronenberg's Videodrome. So not only is he making fun of Stephen King, he's making fun of a director that he's worked with before.
Right. It's layered.
Yeah.
It's layered. I think it's brilliant. I really do. And this idea that, you know, I love it when an audience is put in this position, because he's obviously told, my people will be watching you all the time. If you have one cigarette, this will happen. And then it'll, you know, the punishment will get worse and worse and worse, and the family gets involved. And there's that thing, I think it's in the car, because we see him almost smoke a couple of times, and he stops, well, one time because someone's in his wardrobe, and there's a very actually a comical moment where he throws the umbrella and you hear like a it's so good. But then, yeah, as an audience, you're kind of going, I want him to win, because he's a likable character, and the way he's played by Woods is really likable. But also, you do want him to light up, because we do want to see what's going to happen and what's going to go, what if they're going to go through with it, right?
Well, yeah, and I used the phrase gentleman villains before, and I stand by that, because it's a different kind of villain than a Michael Myers or a Freddy Krueger or somebody who's like born out of true evil or malicious intent. Mm-hmm. You don't hate the bad guys, the air quotes bad guys in this either, because when he goes to Quitters Inc., it's sort of his own volition. It's a monkey's paw wish. He agrees, but then you get this guy who's got like his business suit and seems really fun. I love kind of in the weird dream sequence where the villain of the piece is singing the police song, you know, is so good. But even this dude who's just kind of like, wow, you know, of course we do this partially because it's a tax, you know, shelter.
You're right.
But we also get to help people. Like he's like he's like enthused about helping people quit smoking, but like also enthused that by helping people quit smoking, he gets to use like mafia violence. It's like a very specific person, and you can't hate that guy because he just does what he says he's gonna do. But it's also horrifying.
Yeah, and I think we see some, because I can imagine he wrote all of this in one of those very Stephen King surrealist moments, because when he goes to the 80s party, obviously everyone's smoking, cigs galore because 80s party, but then how it just gets more and more ridiculous, like the kids are smoking, the eyes are following in the picture, there's cartons, you know, human-sized cartons and stuff like that, and that does feel very King.
It does, and we get that amazing cameo from that one character actor whose name escapes me right now, but you
Yes.
know who I'm talking about. He's in
Yeah.
so many movies, and he's the one who's talking to James Woods, and then he does that like very Wile E. Coyote comic thing where he like blows the smoke out of his ears, and it's just like so ridiculous, but also what a great depiction of dependency, right? Or addiction, because
Well, this is the other thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially coming from King.
right, exactly. The idea that James Woods is so desperate to have a cigarette that he's now envisioning these over the top versions of what it would be to be having a cigarette. Like, you know, smoke's literally coming out of everything and everywhere because he wants it so badly, and just like what a nightmare spiral that presents for him. I think it's great.
Yeah, I completely do. And obviously he does fuck up and he takes a drag, obviously. And so when he gets called back in, this is where we're like, how is this going to go? And this, it's such a sort of fever dream, this cage with a double-sided mirror that electrocutes the floor and plays this music. It's like it's so torturous, and it doesn't fit what's on the other side, because as you were saying, this sort of gentlemanly thing and this almost futuristic setup, it feels like.
Yeah, and the wife is literally shocked in the feet. She's jumping around so as to not get
They make her dance.
yeah, electric shocks. And they do the thing where her hair stands on the end, almost
Yeah.
cartoonishly. Speaking of Wile E. Coyote, and James Woods, of course, is forced to watch in horror as this happens. And then our mafioso cigarette baron, I guess, or
Sure.
anti-cigarette baron. He's just like, okay, well, this was really just the warning. We're not going to hurt her, but like now you know. And then the next time we see them interacting, it's like they're chums, because James Woods is like, haha, you got me to quit smoking. And
Right.
and they're still in the back of your mind thinking like, oh,
This can't be it.
this is so messed up.
Yeah. And you're like, no, this can't, that can't be it. But I also like that during the office scene, we see the cat escape, going off to set up the next story.
Right.
That's how I picture it. It's so funny because we see the cat like start its journey, because it's got to get to New Jersey, and this story's over in like 5 minutes. So I love that he goes ahead of us. I just think it's such an interesting decision. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's like a brief aside where we get the cat, as you pointed out earlier, doesn't just leave the office, like makes its way through Manhattan, gets on
To
a
the dock.
ferry. Yeah. This is a seafaring cat for at least the rest of James Woods' tale.
But then, of course, we get the stinger, which is great. And also, it stops. So, well, that's the thing. Actually, these stories, they don't come up with titles. It doesn't tell you when the new one started. It's just follow the cat and things happen around it. And that stinger of seeing the wife's forefinger missing, you don't have time to go, wait, what does that mean, though? So when did that happen? Has she had a conversation with... Because you're on to the next.
Yeah. But it's so grotesque, and it's so him. It's like such a brilliant button. And to see kind of James Woods looking at that missing digit and being like, oh, these guys aren't
shit.
my friends.
No. I think it's great. I really do. I think it's... I'll talk about this more when we get to the end of all three, but they all definitely are unmistakably King, and yet they do all feel very different tonally. And I feel with The Ledge, this next one, it really whizzes by. And I would never normally say this about an anthology segment. I could have done with more of the actual Ledge. The original thing. I could have had him go around twice, because it is so well done. With POV and with, the shaky POV seeing the ground and the up shots and the backlit, everything, the way it's shot genuinely makes my tummy flip. And I've seen it a few times now, and it got me. And even though I know he's going to get back in, when that pigeon fucks with his ankle, I still go through that emotion of going, oh God, he's going to go.
Yeah, it's a truly harrowing story. And I think that it's made all the more intense, especially during the time, because Robert Hayes' performance is so good. But also, this era, he was known mostly for Airplane to the larger viewing
1 and 2,
audience.
yeah.
And so this thing happens where when you're known for silliness and comedy, and then you do something really serious, I think it's disarming for the audience because they're expecting it to be funny. And then when he's put in this like terrible danger and it's not funny, you get this deeper level of concern. Interesting, too, that this story, much like Quitters, Inc., is sort of born out of an air quotes gentleman's agreement, but in a much different way. I think of this story as being akin to the story in Creepshow that takes place in the apartment with the bugs. Even though they're very different, the reason I connect them is they all are both in high rises and they're sort of like above the world and above the laws of everybody else. And so it's like a rich man who's like, this is my domain and I get to choose what happens. And of course it goes very wrong for the rich man in Creepshow in a different way. But this plays out for Robert Hayes and the rich man who bets him to walk around the ledge in a very terrifying way as well.
It still shocked me. I mean, we'll talk through it a little bit more from the start to finish, but it still shocked me just kind of how blasé that moment is and so short when we get the wife's head just rolling out of a bag.
Terrifying. Yeah.
Isn't it? Isn't it genuinely? It's because it is so casual.
It is. Well, I think that in a very similar way to the man who runs Quitters, Inc., but different. Their vibes are different. It's the fact that the man who bets Robert Hayes to walk around the ledge, the whole time we see him in the movie, he's quite jovial. He's clearly...
honking horns.
Yeah. Clearly enraged. There's a fury underneath his calmness. But because he presents as just like, I'm having a good time. This is just a bet. If you can make it around, all is forgiven. And I never go back on my bets. So then when he's just like, boom, here's the head of my wife. You're just like, oh, this guy, we knew he was deranged because he asked this human being to do this.
Right.
But this is the proof positive that he's not nice. You know, we knew it, but now we really know it.
Yeah. And I think, as you say, I think Robert Hayes really sells this one. And it does just go a bit too quickly for me because I love the build-up. As I said, every time he loses footing, it got me. When he goes down that dome, that sort of curved section, I've got my stomach in knots because I'm like, maybe this time he won't make it on my fifth watch. It's incredible. But that, to me, is great filmmaking, if it's still making me question what I'm about to see.
Well, it works because it's such a base fear. It's not anything overly complicated. It's not an ancient demon in the sewers pretending to be a clown. It's not a vampire. It's not a troll in the wall. It's heights. It's something simple. It plays on that primal fear of you are somewhere where you shouldn't be and it's really high up and you might fall. And that's the thing. I mean, even with the rich man kind of messing with him as he's making his way around the ledge, the danger is always just falling. And, you know, seeing his terror and how he communicates it to us as the viewer, we get it because I think we would all be there. And it's a lot. I think that, like, when you look at modern horror, what was that movie that came out recently with the people on like the big tower where is it called Fall?
Full.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Full.
It's that thing where
Fall.
Fall. It's literally that.
And what you just pointed out, I think you hit the nail on the head, as in that it's his domain. It's almost lawless up there because you are like, where are the police? You don't even question that. It feels like, no, he owns this part of the building and he can do whatever he wants with this part of the building. And that alone is terrifying. And then, of course, we see via the cat, like the cat oversees that, he's not going to get what he was told he's going to get. But the thing is, he does stick to the bet because he is, as he says, he always sticks to his bets. It's just not how he expected. Again, there's another bit of a monkey's paw in there. But I mean, that one's very simple. It's so effective. And I feel like I want to go back and read that one again because I've got Night Shift by my bed, which it always is. And I don't remember it. Literally.
But it's effective because it's simple. And I think that's what we were talking about at the beginning is you want more, but maybe we don't need more. I think that this is a story that knows exactly how long it needs to be, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. I think, a couple more beats of pure terror would have been welcome, but there's also...
Peril.
Yeah. But I think there's also the thing where this is one that we got it. We got it. Like, we understand.
True. Very true. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I'd probably complain the other way, to be fair. I'd be like, it could have done a bit less time. That's me. And I'm contrary anyway. So then we come on to the third and final, which is the one that Stephen King wrote for this. And I guess this must be where originally they wanted Sometimes They Come Back. And so I think it's lovely that we get a fresh new story, because I can't... I know this might sound strange. I can't really imagine this one on page.
No, but on the same token, it's very much aligned with his interests, I think, because The Dark Tower is a great example. Fairy Tale is a great example.
Fantasy.
Yeah, it is a great example. The idea that there is a space between worlds where sometimes things that are not native to our plane of existence get out and cause chaos. And here, in a little girl's bedroom, after dark, a small hole in the world opens up and a little troll comes out and it wants to take her breath. And it's dressed as sort of this like little classic fantasy troll. Like, I would buy that when it goes back into the wall and the wall seals up, it's in the world of the gunslinger, or it's in the world of Eyes of the Dragon or something. But it's the fact that it's in her world right now that's where the terror comes from. And the only one who believes it's there is the cat.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The cat, which she got. Of course, this is Drew Barrymore, which we haven't really talked about because we've seen her. She's played smaller roles in each one up until this point. And then this is the one in which she is the lead. Is it Amanda, I think?
Yeah.
Her name is. And I like the cat has made its way here. And it's our cat. That's the thing, because we start this story knowing this cat. We've been on a journey with this cat. And so we're invested in this cat. And I don't think it would hit as hard if it hadn't been our buddy throughout the film, if it had just been, this is where we introduce a cat into these films.
Yeah, and I think the fact that she champions the cat, like in each of the stories leading up to this, the cat is sort of at the mercy of the bad guys. At Quitters Inc., they kidnap the cat so they can demonstrate the shocking device that is eventually used on the wife. And it escapes the clutches of Quitters Inc. And then it gets adopted by the rich man in the ledge, who initially looks like he's treating the cat relatively well until the cat recognizes, this guy is going to try and kill this other guy, and I don't like that. And so then the cat takes a moral standpoint, and the cat's like, I'm not sticking around for whatever this nonsense is. And so finally the cat ends up with a caretaker who just wants a kitty. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of nice. You're right, because up until this point the cat has been in harrowing situation after harrowing situation, so we know its journey and we want it to be okay.
And it is very fairy tale, this a very grim sort of fairy tale. That's where I feel this one lands, and they're in that wonderful sort of kids fantasy way, the very heavy-handed moment about grandma says that cats should be drowned because at night they steal your breath, and so we get that in there so that when we find out that the troll is stealing the breath, it's there's someone to blame, and so the cat gets blamed for everything, and we see that it's that classic trope that we see where it's always out of sight and he's left with the bloody paws, and we're really rooting for it. But it also it does towards the end make you go, that's quite adult and a little bit serious. There's a bit of gore there, and I really enjoy that. And this is the first time I've ever noticed that the mother is reading Pet Sematary in bed. I never noticed before.
Wow, that's mom
4K for you.
Hates cats.
Right.
She is not on board. She wants this cat out of the house. She's reading a book about dead cats. She tries to oust the cat, but then, she doesn't really have a defense once the cat kills the little troll that's trying to steal her daughter's breath.
I really like this stealing the breath, and it did make me wonder if Mick Garris was maybe a fan of this before writing Hocus Pocus. It's very effective, and actually when the troll starts doing it, it feels very uncomfortable.
Well, I'm so glad that you referenced Hocus Pocus, because I always think of this movie and Hocus Pocus together when I watch one or the other, for the reason that at the end, after all of this supernatural and otherwise strife, the cat just gets to have a life. And I think of that line in Hocus Pocus where Thora Birch's character is like, well, you can stay home and grow old and fat with me. Yeah. And like, and when it looks like Thackeray maybe stuck a cat, Thackeray's just like fine with it. And that's sort of what actually happens with General the cat in this story, where it's like, okay, you have done your time. You have witnessed the horrors of the world. You fought the supernatural beast. And now you get to be a fat tabby cat living a good life.
I think also, I love the cat's journey throughout this, and it just looks like so much fun on the set that they've had to build for this troll as well.
Right? Because everything has to be oversized. I mean, I have not done my research, I must admit, on what the set construction was, but, you know, watching it this time around and seeing the troll kind of climbing up the side of the bed and, you know, shimmying up the bird cage, they had to build all that, and that had to be some oversized thing. So an actor in a suit could do that. And I'm wondering where those set pieces are. Is there a giant, like, couch somewhere?
Right.
You know,
and the books and everything, because they used a mixture of forced perspective, blue screen, and obviously oversized stuff. And it reminded me back in the day, and I'm sure it's not even there anymore, at Disney, going to the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids experience where you could sit on the giant ant, and there were tables all the way up to the ceiling, and it was the most magical, incredible thing, and blades of grass 3 times the size of you, and it just reminded me of that. And they had to build all that for this, and because this one is the true, that feels very much like we built this world in this studio for this one, and I love it, and it's so different in tone comparatively.
Yeah, but it's such a great cincher for the anthology too. I think that it is, you're right, the most fairy tale of the stories. That's the thing that maybe is the most interesting about Cat's Eye, because the first 2 stories are very much about the evils of men and the follies of men, but then we end with this fantastical story. And normally when an anthology takes such a tonal left turn, it doesn't work, but for some reason here it really does. And
You're so right.
I don't know why that is, but I fully...
You're so right, that would normally irk.
Yeah, but it works here for me.
And it's funny as well, we should say as well, because this is very funny. There's a lot of slapstick and clowning with this tiny troll, because, you know, when he's on the record player, and of course there's the gag about, again, we get the Police song of...
Every breath you take.
Every breath you take, of course. And there's loads of slapstick, him flying up with the balloons, and then we have cat versus troll. And it's all very, very amusing. But also, yeah, I suppose it wraps around and makes you feel like... ending with this makes me really feel like pulling the duvet up. It's one of those like, oh yes, we end on this fun little story, and that's what I think makes it feel so seasonal to me. There's something very cutesy and warming about the way it wraps up.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning as far as campfire stories go. If we were in the Midnight Society and we were all telling stories, the other 2 tales end in sort of a grotesque way, but this is the story that ends sort of nice. So before we throw the water on the fire and go home, we feel better. We're not leaving disturbed. We feel like, okay, terrible things exist and there's terrors in the world, but sometimes it works out. And that's the best way to leave the campfire, because you don't want to walk through the dark woods on your way home still bothered, you know?
That's exactly it. I think it's great. And none of them outstay their welcome, which is, as we were saying earlier, it can be rare, especially nowadays. I think it's so well structured. I think the only thing that I think doesn't quite work is the Drew Barrymore through line, because that didn't really get explained much. Obviously, she's calling the cat. She has a symbiotic relationship, maybe. She, wherever she can, she astral projects to New York and takes over a mannequin and then a TV. And so I mean, it's fine. You get to see Drew Barrymore in a few different costumes, but
yeah, I guess maybe the implication is that like multiverse Drew is connected to this cat somehow, because she's different people every story, but like,
yeah, true. She's the only through, I guess. So yeah, it's multiverse shit.
Yeah,
let's just leave it at that.
Before the multiverse was cool.
Yes, exactly. Drew was doing it. I loved it. I have to say, I really, really loved it. And it made me feel a bit like a kid, even though, as we say, the first one's about smoking, it's about gangsters, but I don't know, I feel all warm and fuzzy after watching it.
No, there's definitely a nostalgia factor to this, but not in an egregious way. I think the stories all work and all stand on their own. I know that probably the standard anthology question is, which ones are your favorite or what order, and I assume you were getting there. But the thing is that it's hard to say because I see the value in all three of them,
Same. Oh, I absolutely do. But if you had to, Michael.
If I had to,
and you do.
I do. Okay. I take this very seriously. If I had to put them in order, I would say the Troll story would be my favorite because it's just so fantastical and of the era. I think that something I would really like to point out is how, even though it's very Stephen King, at this point in the 80s, it's also very Empire Pictures, that kind of Charles
Bandy,
pre-Full Moon, where I can kind of see this like being, if you pulled that short out and ran it as like a pre-show to the original Troll or Ghoulies or something, it would feel perfectly at home. And I love that because I grew up with that horror and I love that.
Definitely.
So that would probably be my number one pick. Then I would say Quitters Inc. and then The Ledge. But the thing is I like all three of them so much that like in 2 hours I might text you and be like, maybe The Ledge is number 2. I don't know. So
yeah, I think I'm the same and I'm the same as you. I hate actually. I put the pressure on people to do these, and I actually hate doing it myself. But I actually think Critters Inc. might be my number one at this time round.
Right.
And then General, as in Troll, and then the Ledge, I think. Even though the Ledge is the one that made me feel the horror, but they each made me feel a different thing. That's the thing. I really enjoyed the tension and amusement of Critters Inc. And I loved the warm fantasy fuzziness of the Troll one. And then the genuine tension of the Ledge. But yeah, it's very hard to put them. It's just a really good anthology.
It really is. It's a nice bouquet of King.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you so much. I always absolutely love talking to you. And now I'm more in the spirit for the season than ever.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a delight to talk to you as well as celebrate the Halloween season with you. And I'm glad that we got to talk about this awesome movie.
Yeah, me too. I've had quite a few requests for this one, so I was really happy because I sent you a few to choose from, and that jumped out at you, and so I'm really glad we've done that. What's going on? What can we listen out for? How is Midnight Mass going? What have you got coming up?
Midnight Mass is definitely full steam ahead throughout the entirety of the autumn season. We do have a new episode every other Wednesday at midnight. We are doing for the month of Halloween 2 very popular films, one from the Empire catalog, but I won't reveal any titles yet, as well as a witchy fave that I know that children of the 80s and early 90s are obsessed with. And then as far as what's next for me, I wrote and directed a feature called There's a Zombie Outside, which is sort of an art house queer horror that's coming out at the top of 2024. And hopefully I'll have some more news about that soon.
Yeah, I'm so glad you can finally talk about that and say that.
As well as just a little of this, a little of that. We'll see what chaos comes next.
Yeah. Listen, as always, I mean, I'll talk to you before Halloween, I'm sure, but have the most wonderful spooky season and sending you lots of love over there, even though it's boiling hot where you are.
Yes, it is 96 degrees Fahrenheit here. I'll let someone else do the conversion on that one.
Yeah.
But yes, lots of love to you. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween! What a delight it was to have MV back in the house. I love that guy. Thank you so much, Michael. What a brilliant episode. Right then, next week, Emily Head will be back on The Rot to discuss the Troma Jaws spoof in which they replace a shark for a killer lawnmower at a well-to-do country club, Blades, from 1989. The movie is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. Apologies in advance. Until next time, Rotters, toodles.